Hi, I'm Sarah Cowgill, along with Andrew Burrian, Dave Patterson, Graham Noble, and John Clark. And this is the Conservative Five, an online TV production of Liberty Nation News. There's about to be a new sheriff in town come January 20th. And a lot of people are asking what's in store. Like, will fuel prices drop? Will groceries be affordable again? Then what should we brace for if something else is coming at us down the pike? We briefly discussed on election night the movement in the betting markets, stock prices fluctuating, and the sense of economic relief. I said sense of. Information coming out seems promising, but for the everyday people out there with depleted savings accounts and living paycheck to paycheck, Andrew, what can the middle class expect, and when can they expect it?
Well, I mean, if forecasts were easy, I'd be a millionaire by now. But I would say, those two things you mentioned about savings, that's one of the things you mentioned was savings. The savings rate is lower than it was before the pandemic at 4.6%. I don't think it's going to go up anytime soon. If you look at the Federal Reserve, they're cutting interest rates, so there's lack of an incentive to save more and try to get interest on your putrid savings. The second part also is living paycheck to paycheck, as you mentioned. This is a huge issue. If you look at some of the data, real wage growth is still negative. It's down about 3 or 4% since the pandemic. Before we came on here, I came across this interesting statistic from the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, and it showed that the average weekly paycheck has jumped $171 since January 2021. But inflation has devoured all of that and more. So that means those paychecks buy $32 less per week, despite growing nearly 17%. And if you look at some of the recent also Bureau of Labor Statistics data, you see that our wage growth has softened, starting to ease. But price pressures, based on today's latest inflation report, suggest it's going to be a challenge for the average person to claw back from that 20% inflation bomb that occurred a few years ago, on top of all the other things that have dramatically, risen. John will attest to this. Eggs have climbed 100%. Beef has climbed 30%. So all the essential items that the average person needs has just rocketed. So you're gonna have to have a period of deflation, which of course would be coupled with an economic downturn. So it's about balancing the risks.
You brought up the Fed's interest rate, and I'm going to throw it over to Graham on that one right there. What about interest rate cuts? Is that something that we can see immediately or not?
Well, I can tell you, Sarah, that the Federal Reserve has been cutting my personal interest rate for a very long time.
Please clap.
Okay. Then over it once.
I like that. That was good. I like that.
But no, the thing about all this manipulation, and I think probably Andrew would agree with me on this, is that when you're using interest rates, whether you're raising them or lowering them in order to kind of manipulate, kind of the fiscal condition of the country, it's kind of the equivalent of robbing Peter to pay Paul. I mean, it's all about Band-Aids. As far as I understand it, interest rate increases are not now kind of on the horizon, but as Andrew has often pointed out, that's always a possibility. I'll leave it at this. The only answer to our massive fiscal quagmire that we're in is a massive shrinking of government, and therefore a massive shrinking of government spending. And then we wouldn't have to worry so much about where the interest rates are going.
There are two scenarios right now that the Fed has portrayed is like one or two are likely. First is that rates are coming down, though the pace is unknown. I mean, the pace is if you look at the summary of economic projections, it's about 3% in the next 2 years. The other scenario is that the Fed may pause rate cuts based on the economic outlook that would arise from the coming administration, based on tariffs and how that could be an inflationary aspect.
Oh, and that's a good point, Andrew. And I'm gonna, I've heard how, of course, social media, every side of the aisle, they're all freaking out about these tariffs. And I've read about how tariffs are inflationary. This is not my bailiwick, obviously. But Dave, is this something the public should be concerned about under a second Trump term?
Well, Sarah, at the risk of dog paddling in Andrew's swim lane, tariffs are not anything new. For Americans, as early as the mid-1700s, there was a set of regulations called the Townshend Acts, and it charged Americans import duties on glass and lead and paper and tea. And when Henry Clay of the Whig Party, which no longer exists, and men don't wear wigs, which may be the reason, but when he ran against James Polk, a Democrat, Clay was a staunch protectionist and believed that tariffs protected American goods from foreign competition. John Quincy Adams also signed a bunch of tariffs. But many in the 1900s were firm believers that, tariffs were central to the American economy. And during Trump's first term, he famously applied tariffs on Chinese goods, and detractors complained loudly that inflation would skyrocket. But it didn't. And the inflation remained rather stable, and just under 2%. Generally, the goods on which the tariffs applied become more expensive, but at the same time, it prompts the consumers to buy American goods, which then become more competitive. Do
we make anything anymore? Do we make anything anymore? Do we just import everything?
Yeah, we do. I mean, manufacturing is actually on the rise, and it's the American purchasing power that drives the economy. I think that if you were to look at one thing, and I suspect that Andrew will agree, if you're looking at one thing that really does drive inflation, it's massive influxes of money, and which were pretty much tied to the Biden administration's policy.
Okay, let's talk about immediate relief. And I've been talking about this, for 4 years, is that we need to produce our own energy. And I know John Clark and I are on the same page with this. The first thing to ease people back into a sigh of relief is going to be lower gas prices. And heating prices, Clark. Come on, help me out here. I'm pretty sure you agree with me.
Well, I'll help you out. Yeah, I'm tempted to disagree with you, but I'm going to have to agree with you. And President-elect Trump has said he intends to bring fuel prices down. Whether he can bring them all the way down to where they were a few years ago, I don't know, for the reasons we're discussing. There's inflation baked in. Part of the increase in fuel prices literally is inflation, and that's not a genie that goes quietly back into its bottle. And some of the things that are being discussed, as Graham said, if we're going to really impact that aspect of our economy, which is directly related to fuel prices, it's kind of a vicious cycle, then we do have to look at cutting spending, perhaps stimulating economic growth. That could be done through tax policies or otherwise, maybe not so much with tariffs, but we'll stay out of those dangerous dogpiling waters right now. And, there are unforeseen things like, what if the conflict in Ukraine subsided? What if there was a new conflict in the Middle East where there are many choke points for fuels? But certainly this administration could reboot some of the leases that were terminated by the Biden administration in their war on oil, which they need oil, coal, and natural gas to build their renewables. So again, it's kind of a dog chasing its tail here. So I think that there's a tremendous amount that a new administration can do to actually bring down those energy costs, which then impact food, transportation, heat, everything else. And so it's very much entangled with the overall state of the economy and our economic health. And until we tackle that, because there's been a lot of gaslighting about inflation, it's going to continue to gnaw at energy prices and at our ability to get our economic feet back on the ground again.
Yeah, if I may just address a couple of things with my 45 seconds of time left, I would say that Trump's tariffs did have a price inflation aspect. The Cato Institute, they put together a comprehensive list of all the estimates that show that real wage growth fell, jobs were lost, and prices climbed as a result of the Trump tariffs. New estimates show pretty much the same thing. When it comes to energy, the main thing will not be so much about federal land management. It'll be also about price action. Prices will dictate whether oil companies are going to, accelerate production and drill, baby, drill. Break-even points range. If you look at regional central banks, it's about $55, $65. So I spoke to an oil executive the other day, and he said his break-even point could even be $25, and it will be all depend on prices.
Well, folks, I think this kind of sounds like a long slog we've got to go. It's not going to happen on day one. Sounds promising to me and the C5 panel. Of course, we'll keep you in the loop. So thanks for tuning in, and thanks, panel, for a great discussion. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform, YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble. We're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation News has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. Now, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today for the latest news and commentary. Your choice for free thinking, free speech, libertynation.com.